Hey everybody, it's Andrew Block for another episode of Goblin Talk. Today I want to talk a little bit about Dungeoncrawlers. With the crowdfunding of Hasbro Pulse and Hero Quest kind of looming in the forefront, and that being one of the hot topics of the day, my mind has been on Dungeoncrawlers a lot lately. And just so you know, a little update on Hero Quest. It is currently at $1.9 million. Quickly approach, well, not quickly, it kind of slowed down in its funding. It is approaching the $2 million mark. And apparently, according to comments on my last podcast, they have fixed the Canadian shipping rates. They have made it manageable for our Canadian gaming brethren to acquire this piece of gaming history, and I am super happy about that. Still no word on what they plan to do about the UK edition, and or if they even plan to do that at all. Again, I think there's some kind of logistics behind that we are not aware of. There's probably some kind of licensing going on there, because if I remember my history correctly, and a little bit of dirt I did dig up, when Games Workshop first teamed up with Milton Bradley to do Hero Quest, that was only the American edition, and they teamed up with a bunch of different distributors for different versions of the game all over the world. So there might be some kind of distribution issues that we're just not aware of. Anyway, so on to the topic of the day. Dungeoncrawlers. Me, personally, as I said in my Hero Quest episode, they're some of my favorite types of games. Now, this is probably due to my background in Dungeons and Dragons and other RPGs. So, a dungeon crawler is a game where players typically take on the roles of some kind of hero or adventurer, and they go on some kind of adventure or quest or mission, and they will typically get rewards for it. Now, there are two major types of dungeon crawlers out there nowadays. Well, actually, there's probably a bunch more, but I categorize them as two major types. Campaigners and one-offs, one-night stands, as I like to call them. And I have a couple of in each category. I have Lord of the Rings, Journeys in Middle-earth, which is a campaigner. And that game is actually really cool because it is actually two different types of games in one, sort of. It is a dungeon crawler, but it has two different types of missions. It has the exploration type of mission where it has more of kind of like a micro view of the world, and you're moving your guys on kind of an overworld map, and you're exploring this map, and you're battling some monsters here and there, and you're investigating towns and sites, and dealing with certain events and stuff like that. And then there's other scenarios within the campaign where it deals with a micro view, where it kind of zooms in on a single location, such as a tavern or a camp. And it's mostly battle-centric at that part. It's mostly a single encounter. Or the objective of that particular encounter becomes more centralized. You're not typically investigating a bunch of different things. It's you need to do this thing, so do that thing. Now, I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I know a lot of Lord of the Rings lore. There are some people out there like Stephen Colbert who completely dwarf me. I watch that guy recite things from the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings appendix, and I just drop my jaw in awe at his knowledge of Lord of the Rings. The way he recounts the lore of the Valar and the Maya, and how he can just spout out information about Gandalf and his relationship to the rest of the Maya and Eru Iluvatar and all this stuff. it astounds me. It's freaking amazing. That's really cool. Anyway, that's a topic for a different day. Lord of the Rings: Journeys of Middle Earth is a unique dungeon crawler because while most dungeon crawlers kind of have this a Dungeons and Dragons kind of setup, they have one player who plays the bad guy side. He controls the monsters and the events and things of that nature. He sets up the map, and when you go into rooms and stuff like that, he'll set up like, okay, this is what you see, this is what's going on, these are the items that are laying around, stuff like that. Journeys in Middle Earth, all the players are actually cooperative. The bad guy player is played by an app on your tablet or your phone, or even I think it's downloadable on Steam. Yeah, I think it's downloadable on Steam. So you can download it on Steam and run it on your computer, which is actually really cool if you have like a TV in your or a monitor in your game room. You can put it up on a big screen and everybody can see it, and it's really cool. And it keeps track of all the events and stuff that's going on. Now, this mechanic was borrowed from another dungeon crawler. Most people actually consider this more of an adventure game, but it uses the same engine as Mansions of Madness. Mansions of Madness is a game that's set in H.P. Lovecraft's Arkham world. Arkham is a fictional city in Massachusetts where Cthulhu and all the dark evil gods of, well, actually I don't think they're actually evil, but they're unknown entities from like the great beyond that try to come through, and they create like all kinds of weird things happening in this world. So Mansions of Madness is a dungeon crawler where you're usually in a spot in Arkham and you're trying to figure out what's going on. You're trying to stop cultists from opening up a portal, or trying to defeat the monsters from summoning their big master monster or something to that effect. There's even a scenario in there where you're jumping back and forth between the future and the present and the past and stuff like that. It's all actually very cool. But that game is also run by an app the same way Journeys in Middle Earth is. The bad guy player is the app, and it takes care of how the monsters work, and it'll tell you when certain events happen, and it'll give you informative text and things like that. It's actually very neat. Now, that was introduced in the second edition of Mansions of Madness. The first edition of Mansions of Madness was more traditional. It had that bad guy player, and all of these run off of an engine that was built off of a game called Descent, which is more of a traditional fantasy dungeon crawler. So you have a group of adventurers who are exploring dungeons and wilderness and things like that. You're defeating monsters for treasure and trying to save towns and princesses and things of that nature. And it has the bad guy player. So Mansions of Madness is a one-night stand type of game. It's not campaign. The scenarios aren't related. You can play them in a single night. Some of them take longer than others, but you can play them in a single night. Descent is both. If you want, you can play it as a campaign, or you can choose individual quests and play them in a single night, or you can choose to play the campaign. Now, the campaign has extra quests that can only be played in the campaign, and then depending on whether you succeed or fail on certain quests, it'll take you on different branches through the campaign. Fantasy Flight also took the engine from Descent and they expanded it into the Star Wars universe. And they created a campaigner dungeon crawler called Star Wars Imperial Assault. And in this game, the players are playing generic, well, they're not really generic. Yeah, they're generic. Generic player characters, and you're completing missions to defeat the Empire. I haven't actually got a chance to play that one yet. It's been sitting on my shelf for a few months, It's hard for me to get a campaigner going because I'm also running Dungeons and Dragons, and getting a regular group together is pretty difficult, and Star Wars Imperial Assault requires the bad guy player. Now, recently, they've, within the last few years, they've developed apps similar to Mansions of Madness and Journeys of Middle-earth for Imperial Assault and Descent, so that you can play them co-op. But you can tell that the games weren't really designed for it, because they try to mod certain mechanics from the bad guy player into the app. So, for an example of that is a stormtrooper in Imperial Assault, for example, has a certain movement rate, and then he has a certain set of actions. And the Imperial player would obviously choose whichever one of these actions that would be best for him, depending on the mission. You know, if he wanted to kill a certain player, he'd be like, okay, well, this attack action would be best for me. But the app has a list of kind of like choose your own adventure things, and it would come up in the app and it would say, if this, then that. If this, then that. If this, then that. Whereas in like Mansions of Madness or Journeys of Middle-earth, the monsters act a little more organically. It says, move the monster towards the nearest hero, and if you can, attack. And that's it. Now, this dungeon crawling engine that I keep referring to for these games, it's been updated over the years. It's obviously not exactly the same game between all these. They all have their own unique mechanics and their own unique things to do. But when you play them side by side and stuff like that, you look at the rule sets, you can see the evolution of the engine. You can see, oh, well, that system is similar to the system in this game. And, oh, I can see where they took that from this. And the overall structure of the game is very similar. So, another two dungeon crawling games from the Fantasy Flight line is Doom. Doom, the board game. Now, back in 2004, they released Doom, the board game. And I think that was the one that actually started it all. That or Descent First Edition. I can't remember which one. I don't have either of those. I have Descent Second Edition. But they released Doom, the board game. And it was based on the art and the models and everything like that. Like I said, I don't have it and I have never played it. But based on what I've seen, it seems to be based on Doom 3. But more recently, they released another Doom board game based on Doom 2016. And I got that one. And they stripped away a lot of the complexity from the other dungeon crawlers. This is more run and gun, complete the objectives. And the players play a squad of Marines, and the bad guy player plays the demons. This game is total combat. There is definitely no campaign here. The missions in it are loosely connected, so if you really wanted to, you could play them as kind of a pseudo campaign and feel like you're running through a story mode. But there's no sense of exploration in Doom. It's just, we're in here to complete an objective and blow up some monsters. And it's very cool. The art in it is taken right out of the game. Now, another dungeon crawler I have, this one is actually not by Fantasy Flight. It's Conan, based on Conan the Barbarian. Now, it's more tied to the works of Robert E. Howard, the creator of Conan, rather than the movie Conan the Barbarian with Arnold Schwarzenegger. So it has that more sword and sorcery feel to it. But it has a very unique action mechanic system. Again, it's one of those games where one player plays the dungeon master and he plays all the bad guys. and all the other players play the heroes. You know, we got Conan, Shavatis, Balit, and there's a few others. Herodotus, I actually can't pronounce his name. It's spelt weird. He's some kind of wizard. And then we've got in one of the expansions you get like a ninja, and then you get this Nordic Viking guy, and what's the other one? I don't know. But there's some cool things. Now, obviously, Conan is king in these games, so if you're playing the Conan character, you can expect to be the dominant personality, so to speak. That is one thing I've noticed about that game. But it's still pretty fun, and I enjoy it. I've had plenty of good experiences with them. All of them I've played, except for Imperial Assault, like I said. I've tinkered with it with the app by myself, because with the apps you can play those games by yourself, since you don't need a player to play the DM. But it's obviously more fun with other players. As a fantasy fan, I have a tendency to stray towards the fantasy dungeon crawlers. You know, Conan, Descent, Lord of the Rings, Journeys of Middle-earth. I even considered getting rid of Imperial Assault. It's got some really cool models. You got an ATST that shows up in a couple missions. But just finding the time to get it to the table. Now, Imperial Assault does have a secondary mode. It's called like a skirmish mode. It's got these skirmish maps that you can set up where you and another player can build an army worth a certain amount of points using the miniatures and attempt to complete these certain objectives. But that just doesn't appeal to me. So that's one I'm considering getting rid of. Even though I like Conan, my group doesn't seem to be too keen on Conan. So I've considered getting that one, even though that's one of my more expensive ones that I've invested in. So that one kind of breaks my heart. So yeah. What dungeon crawlers do you own? Do you own any? Have you played any? Are you interested in playing any? Do you have any fond memories of playing dungeon crawlers in your gaming career? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. This has been Andrew Block on another episode of Goblin Talk. I hope you enjoyed it. And I appreciate you guys coming out here just listen to me ramble about nothing. And I'll talk to you soon.